Canada. We stand on.
Well, I don't even know the goddamn lyrics to our own anthem. Welcome, folks. It is the Canadian GP Review Show. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll notice there is a lovely Canadian flag behind Mike and me. No, we're not starting some weird Great White North Canadian political show. We are here to talk about the race that went down in Montreal on the weekend. But before that, we had, well, hockey on the minds in Montreal, and my favorite part, Guenther Steiner gearing up in Habs goalie gear. I'll tell you right now, he looked the part. Like it did, you know, when you see people who have never played hockey and they put on the goalie gear, it's like, oh God, this could be a nightmare. But he was apparently stopping shots.
Oh yeah, he was right into it.
He looked great, a natural.
He looked great, and I'd be remiss if I didn't give a quick shout out to my boy Jack Hughes, New Jersey Devils superstar. He was with his American boys with Team McLaren. And Greg, you mentioned Mitchie Marner was with Team Red Bull, which is kind of odd because Red Bull are winners and the Leafs aren't. I don't know why they'd want that bad luck around their garage. But hey.
Pretty boom, too, carrying a Leafs jersey onto the grid.
Oh my!
Brandishing that thing around Montreal.
In Quebec. Wow.
Wow. That must have been why you made that bet with your girlfriend there, Greg, that Max wasn't going to win the race.
I was really hoping you weren't going to bring that up, Mark. But yes, Jill and I had a friendly wager as she was leaving and the race was starting. She said, if Max wins, you owe me a 10-minute foot massage. I took the bet like a fool just to justify my podium picks, maybe more than anything. And yeah, Jill's feet got rubbed last night.
They sure did, folks.
Smart woman.
Don't worry. This podcast is rated G for general audiences. That's as far as we're going to go there. Of course, before we get into the episode any further, Boxing Rock is still our main sponsor. We got another one that we really need to do a video for before they cancel that sponsorship, but that's another time, another day, hopefully soon. What do I got here? I got the Crafty Jack, the English Brown Ale. It's a nice light green color for those light green days. I'm going to crack that open right now.
I got the over the top cranberry sour ale.
Nice one.
All right.
Love it.
Sparkling water.
Cheers,
Yes.
pal.
Cheers to you, Mark. Cheers, Greg. Cheers to the casuals.
Sparkling water over there, right? Ooh,
Yeah,
that's
it's
sorry to interrupt, Greg. That is a nice. I haven't had this one yet. It's only 4.3%, so it's practically a waste, but it tastes great and it goes down smooth. All right, so we were pretty excited for our boys in green this weekend because Aston Martin had a few upgrades. We went over that in the preview episode. We weren't sure what the upgrades were, but Mike, you found out, and you're going to break that down for us.
A little bit of speculation on that, as always. Most of it was focused around the floor, but it turns out the most prominent upgrades from the Aston for the Montreal GP were based around the side pod areas, and yeah, very, very unique. Basically, it's how the airflow is going over the side pods of the car. They've channeled that more in a Ferrari modeled aspect with their own take on it.
Okay,
and,
like the old Ferrari side pods.
Similar to the ones that are current now.
Okay.
So it's like if you're looking at the car like this and how the wind goes over the side, essentially. Now it's these vents and these gaps and also the shaping of the model. It's very difficult to do it without kind of like a diagram, but essentially it's more concentrated airflow that's increased a little bit of downforce as well, and it seems to be an efficient way to move the air, and it's equating to lap time.
I'd say so. I mean, we're going to get to quali and the race, but great updates, and happy to see that after a somewhat disappointing Spanish Grand Prix, although you wouldn't say that for Lance, they are back near the top. Some weird quote from McLaren legend Mika Hakkinen. I don't know if you boys saw this. He came out before race weekend, and he was like, hey, McLaren, I know they're not doing so great right now, but expect them to compete with Red Bull later on in the season. I think you may have jumped a few teams there, Mika, before getting to Red Bull. I don't know where he's getting that sort of information.
Yeah, I'm lost on speculation on that. No idea where he would have pulled that one out of.
like, I'm glad to see these teams are making much needed upgrades to make it somewhat of a competition going down the stretch, but that is a lofty goal and pretty crazy expectations to throw on a team before the race.
Like, he's not a homer, right? Like, he's Finnish. They're typically pretty reserved and on the nose.
Yeah, and I mean, Miko was in the sport for many, many years and remained in the same circles as well. So you think that he'd be pretty informed. But speaking of upgrades, we haven't heard much out of the McLaren camp as of late. So where he's drawing those facts from and those, I'm just lost too.
Yeah, wishful thinking. I mean, McLaren definitely, they have improved since the beginning of the season. I mean, nightmare start, so only one way to go up. But, I mean, they had a pretty decent race weekend, but I just don't see, I mean, obviously, no one's going to compete with Red Bull this season, so a little out of pocket, but hey, he's a legend, and we'll let him have it.
Speaking of drivers from that era, Mark, we had an unexpected appearance somewhat from Jacques Villeneuve pre-race.
Jacques was on the grid walk, and a little context to how that interview went down with Martin Brundle. There's a couple cool custom helmets this weekend. We had Lance, of course, with his all-white and Canadian flag helmet. We had Bottas with potentially the greatest helmet of all time. Essentially, it was the Canadian wilderness and pretty much every stereotype about Canadians. But hey, we'll live it. We'll wear it. It looked great. There was a lumberjack. There was beavers. There was, maple syrup. Good times there. But Charles, he wore a Gilles Villeneuve. Oh, I got it that time there, boys. Tribute helmet. I think it was actually a helmet that Gilles had worn in the past.
Modeled after that. Obviously not, not the actual helmet that wouldn't pass safety regulations anymore. But he, I guess, got in a bit of hot water. Not really. It was only temporary, but he didn't ask the family if he could do that, the Villeneuve family. And they're pretty private. I kind of like, I guess, the Schumachers. I mean, anytime there's going to be a tragic event, the family's going to be a little private about that matter. So I understand where they're coming from. Charles ended up asking if he had permission, and he did. And then on the grid walk, Martin asked Jacques about that, and he cleared it up. It was only, a quick miscommunication, although he did say, I hope Charles does well with the helmet on, or else. Kind of sounded like a threat. Yeah, especially paying homage to what a tremendous racer and influence in Canadian motorsport for sure. So I'm glad that there was that little tiff was resolved quickly there. But Jacques always going to be poking around for sure. Yeah, and nice that Martin was able to bump into him and give us some context as far as the memorial.
Yeah.
So just to circle back on the helmets as well on Lance's. Pretty cool features there with the red and white Canadian colors, but it also had 5 QR codes on the top that corresponded with locations around the city that meant a lot to him. One of them was a deli that serves the best smoked meat in Montreal by his standards, but they also did it might have, I think it was.
Oh, it's got to be. If he didn't put Schwartz's, then he's wrong.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, they had obviously a photo shoot at the deli as well with some smoked meat, poutine, you name it. So nice feature. Nice bit of Canadiana.
Yeah, all the Canadian delicacies there.
Yeah, every single one. That's shout out QR codes. They were big like in the early 2010s and kind of went away, and they just made a ferocious comeback.
Big time.
We're back.
Yeah, gotta love it. Maybe Lance could make a ferocious comeback later this season. Probably not.
Not likely.
Not likely. All right, but without further ado, let's get into the on-track drama. And it began immediately with practice. A lot of rain. I wasn't able to watch any of the practice sessions, unfortunately. I was golfing, but you guys did. I heard everyone's favorite groundhog made an appearance.
Must have heard of, we were shouting him out in trivia there.
100%.
Right? Had to make an appearance. Him and the whole family, I guess. That was interesting what happened with the CCTV shutting down in P1. And the clock was still, I believe so. And then the clock was still running. And then, so, the fans are kind of left holding the bag on that one. And then they ended up having a 90-minute session in FP2 to make up for it. But it was basically a downpour the whole time.
Yeah.
So, not much fanfare for Friday, but Saturday morning was much better, I guess.
Yeah. And Saturday came, and with it came the final practice and then qualifying. And in that final practice, it looked like the first Ferrari fuck-up of the weekend. Carlos booted it into the wall pretty good. I thought there was going to be maybe gearbox issues.
Mentioned that in the chat.
There wasn't. Hey, got lucky on that one, and they were able to fix that bad boy before qualifying, which is only a few hours after. So
yeah, not much time at all. Very impressive for the Ferrari mechanics to get that livery ready for Carlos to enter qualifying. I mean, even in the build up to qualifying in the pre-show, we saw the Ferrari still in pieces in the garage, but they managed to get it on track for them.
All right, so we started with Q1, and rain was on the forecast. It pretty much was raining in Q1, but not as heavy as it eventually got. And Joe had some bad luck pretty much right off the bat. He had a drive shaft error, and that would red flag the race. I was watching quali from the golf course. I was golfing all weekend, guys. It was a great time. But after that, it was a lot of traffic, and that led to a lot of 3 grid place penalties because... What's the full word of like impeding?
No, impeding another driver is for sure like how they classify it, and that would be how they would the language they would also use in the penalty.
Yeah, Yuki was all over the place, getting in everyone's way, and Carlos. Well, it wasn't just Carlos on that back straight where Pierre lost out and eventually was knocked out in Q1.
Yeah.
But he was coming down that last back straight. Yuki was sort of in the way. He got out of the way late. So there's no way Pierre was going to see Carlos, but neither of them should have been on the racing line. I'm not sure how that happens.
Or just hold up a bit. You know what I mean? Like have ample warning. They can see them coming in the mirrors. The engineers should be letting them know that Gasly's coming down the same straight as they are on a flying lap, and to just hold up. But again, tire preparation, sprint to getting the last lap possible is always on the mindset of the teams too.
Yeah.
So, just unfortunately, yet again, poor communication from Ferrari resulting in a 3-place grid penalty for Carlos.
For Carlos, and if you're keeping track, that's the second Ferrari fuck-up of the weekend,
Yes.
and that's only Q1. But Q2 started, and that is when we had a massive big brain move from the Williams racing team and their newest team principal, James Vowles, who is he's becoming one of my favorite figures in the sport. I know when he was with Mercedes, obviously wasn't team principal, so he wasn't getting as much face time. But now, I mean, we both had hot takes for Williams in the group chat, Greg, after this race. But I honestly think that James and the people around him that Williams have hired, if they go in the right direction, maybe that becomes a championship competing car and team within the next decade.
I don't disagree. And yeah, we love the transparency from this guy. And obviously the strategy is looking better and better. So that's exciting to see. And I think we also talked about this too, the gains that Williams made this weekend. It's nice to see a legacy brand like Williams reasserting themselves and moving in the right direction for sure, because they've had a few rough years.
I couldn't agree with more with you both, you boys there. Speculation from myself early on in the year is how much is Williams and DeLorean or DeLorean, sorry if I can't pronounce that, DeLorean. Anyways, their title sponsor and ownership group.
Bombardier.
Out of the States, with the failures and poor performances over the last couple seasons, speculation was that they were going to sell. How much do they want to invest? Now they've brought in key personnel such as James Vowles that seems to have organized the team. They have the resources, they have the finances, they have the plan and commitment from the sponsors as well. We'd like to see some more sponsors on that car coming up soon too, but lap time is going to definitely bring that. They threw everything they could at the Canadian Grand Prix, and including a new power unit as well as some other upgrades that they brought to increase downforce. We already know it's been slippery in a straight line, and now with those combined upgrades, and one hell of a drive from Alex, that Williams is looking very competitive and is going to continue to improve. Also, wind tunnel time resets in June. So based on current positions, Williams is going to be able to keep developing that livery and, look for them to keep moving up the grid. And hopefully we can see Logan Sargent step up and kind of follow Alex Albon's lead.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they have really turned their heads towards the future. They're not even really focused on this year per se, and they're still getting results, not consistently, but Alex earlier in the year was getting results with Logan. I mean, it's been a rough year for him. I mean, it's typically rough for most rookies in F1. He's had some bad luck. I don't know if he has what it takes. I mean, he's still young. We'll see what happens. I know F1 probably would like to have an American driver on the grid for years to come for obvious marketing purposes. But before all that, let's go back to Q2 and talk about what Williams did. Because yes, it was raining a little bit, but the track was drying. And after Q1, there was a racing line that asked for softs. And Williams answered. Albon, the only guy in Q2 going out on softs. Mind you, the McLarens immediately recognized their mistake and got on softs as well. But he found that tiny little window because rain was on the way. I believe it was 6 to 7 minutes away when Q2 started. But he was able to get a lap in on the softs, figure out where the dry spots are, where's the pace, where's everything else. And on that second lap on the softs, he put in the best time in Q2.
Yeah, very, very, awesome. Very impressive.
On the other hand, we had Charles, our boy. I don't like, what does that team have against him? Because Charles himself realized what was happening and he said, I think we should go on the softs. Like, it's Albon's out there on softs. The McLarens are switching. Like, it is a dry track right now. And they said, nope, stay on the intermediates, put in a time. Eventually, he did get on the softs like most of the grid, but at that point, it was too late. And Ferrari screws Charles again.
Yeah, and then that also compromised him into the final stage of qualifying where he didn't have enough time to get his inters switched on either to potentially, move up the grid for qualifying spots. So, I believe they said we want a banker lap or whatever, but I mean, with the variable weather changes and they had already been able to see sector times from the cars that did jump on the soft. So, big missed opportunity by Ferrari in qualifying for me.
If I'm counting, is that Ferrari fuck up number 3?
That is number 3. And I feel like we've talked about this on episodes past, and it's not something that is unique to Formula One. It goes into strategy across all sports, and it's adapting to what happens during the race or during qualifying or during the game. So many coaches or teams, they'll go out, they have a game plan. It doesn't go the way they want, but they don't alter that game plan, end up losing. It doesn't seem like Ferrari is ever interested in adapting their game plan, and it's constantly screwing them.
Yeah, I very much agree too. It seems like this principle mentality based around strategy and then reluctancy to adapt is costing them in every facet possible.
And we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about our boy Lance. He had, unfortunately, another disappointing qualifying. Q2 spins out. I can't remember if he was on the intermediates and he wanted to switch, or it was another one where like he was on the softs and then the intermediates, and then he spun out and he took a bit of his wing with it.
Yeah, I was expecting a lot more damage from the sector that he was in, and I was going sideways down the track, a couple turns, but a little bump off the nose, and that was basically qualifying for him.
That was it. Couldn't get it a Q2 again. And another guy who's just, poor Checo. How many? Is that 3?
That's 3 in a row.
3 in a row that he hasn't gotten out of Q2.
He hasn't made 2-3. Yeah.
Helmet must be breathing down his back.
Is Daniel Ricciardo looking a little more appealing right now?
You might be right about that, Mike. I mean, Daniel was on hosting duties this weekend. It doesn't seem like, I don't know, I feel like it takes a lot of mental preparation to prepare for an F1 season. I don't think not to say that he couldn't, flip the switch like that, but he seems to be having a great time not having to worry about actually competing.
Pressure's off,
The pressure's off. He's having fun. He's flipping the bird at George Russell. He's having a great time out there. But He's definitely still very capable behind the wheel. And I mean, if this continues, I mean, Fernando is not that far behind Checo now in the player standings. I mean, and if Lance could do anything right, sorry, Lance, we love you, buddy.
Yeah.
That Constructors Championship could be up for grabs.
Yeah, it's Checo's not doing himself any favors. Results are poor, qualifying is poor. Anything less than in the same RB7 that Max is driving. Now, I know that the RB7 and previous liveries have been set up more leaning towards Max's driving style, and that might not necessarily complement Checo's style, which it doesn't because they're very different. That being said, expectations remain the same, and these results, Red Bull's not gonna stand for this for much longer.
No, definitely not. And I've heard that before where the car is more geared towards Max, but that just seems like more of an excuse than anything because you look at the other teams, you look at George and Lewis. No one's ever talking about, the car's set up more for George or Lewis. No, you go out there and you perform.
And at the end of the day, that thing is a rocket ship. There's no denying how superior that livery is to all the other liveries on the track. So excuses are going to run out pretty soon.
Yeah, absolutely. So we head into Q3. We're missing Checo. We're missing Charles, Lance, the 2 AlphaTauris out early. I mean, Nick DeVries, we're going to have to talk about him too, talking about drivers being replaced. But Q3, the rain is on its way, and it's the heavy rain that's on its way. So everyone's getting out there. It was actually Max was out there before anyone else, and you rarely see the drivers at the top of the grid getting out early in qualifying sessions. And that's because the downpour was coming. Everyone's scrambling to put in times, and it was actually not the rain that stopped the race. It was an Oscar Piastri red flag, but just before, and I'm talking seconds before, Nico Hülkenberg puts in a time for P2, and it stood. Unfortunately, I guess after that, he was so happy and jubilated that he went a bit too quick during the red flag, and that resulted in a 3-place grid penalty, which they were just handing those out like hotcakes in qualifying. Disappointing because we were like, all right, we got a mixed up grid here. And still Hulk in 5th is a bit of a mixed up grid, but why'd you have to take that away from us?
Yeah, we were amped and just miserable when the penalty came out.
Yeah, devastated for Hulk. Hasn't had I don't think he's what, was that the first time he's been on the front row of the grid or the first time since 2013, 2014 kind of thing?
Yeah, it was. He's been on the front row before, and I think it was around there. Yeah, so unfortunate that he gets put back. I mean, he was only going to get overtaken anyways, but it would have made things interesting on that first turn. All right, let's get into the race. We had a green track, which was explained to me that because of all the rain in practice and qualifying sessions, pretty much all of the rubber built up from tires and cars going over it was washed off. So grip was pretty low heading into it. So I was like, yeah, it's not raining, but it's going to feel a little slippery out there.
Yeah, and with the colder temperatures associated with that type of weather, especially here in Canada, it's going to make heating the tires up that much more difficult, especially with the lack of grip on the green track.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had Max, Fernando, and Lewis, our top 3 on the grid. And personally speaking, my podium picks were looking pretty good. Now, obviously, Lewis and Fernando needed to switch places for me, but that happened immediately. Before the first turn, Lewis took off. He had one of the best starts I've seen in all year. He was gone before Fernando even realized it. And I had a perfect podium and the race right there.
Yeah, let's end the race at turn 1 for Mark.
Turn 1, done. Cancel. Red flag, torrential downpour, fastest lap, Nikita Mazepin. No, it was not to be, though, because Fernando would get that position back. And before we knew it, on lap 7, Logan Sargent. It's funny, it seems like drivers who may make mistakes more than they should, they also seem to have the bad luck more than anyone else too. And this was not Logan's fault. The Williams had a engine failure, and his race was over 7 laps in. And I just want to give a huge shout out to the stewards and marshals in Canada, knowing now that it is localized. So those were Canadians out there doing that. It was a virtual safety car. And then the marshals got out there and rolled the Williams right off the track into the runoff, closed that barrier, didn't have to call the full safety car, so there was no bunch up, and we were right back racing.
That's right.
Hats off.
Hats off to all the volunteers and stewards that give up their precious time to come and help the GP out and make sure the drivers and the fans alike are safe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they were slick in first class all weekend. Hats off.
You're damn right. And you know what? I think maybe a little toast is in order.
Ooh, I think
for
so.
the Canadian employees at the
Yes.
GP. What do we have here? It's actually not alcohol.
No, but it's
something
another,
a little different.
Yeah, a little Canadian delicacy
Oh
here.
my gosh. And Greg, we have a shot glass for you. You're not going to be able to drink this literally, but you'll be able to drink it virtually. And that's pretty much the future. So don't worry about it.
Ennis Maple Products Limited. Check them out at ennismaple.com.
So wait, is this just syrup or is it actually a drink? Because it's not as viscous as
This is
you
maple
think.
syrup, buddy. But this is the good stuff. Straight from the tree.
Oh my
Ooh,
gosh.
Look at that.
Look at that.
You can smell it from here.
Yes. Remind you of home.
Now, I had maple syrup on some waffles yesterday before the race. Okay, you know what?
now
I
it's
lied.
straight to the brain.
That is viscous, boys.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, baby.
Cheers. Cheers. Cheers, Gregor.
Cheers, boy. Nice work.
Oh, yeah.
That's actually quite nice.
Start the day off right.
And you guys aren't the only guys shooting maple syrup on the weekend. So being here in the States, I had the good fortune of being able to watch the Grandstand broadcast that featured Danny Rick and Will Arnett, fellow Canadian. And I have to say, they did a great job. It was very engaging. I only did about maybe 12 laps early in the race with those guys, but yeah, really interesting. Danny also ate some poutine, gave a little bit of insight, but wasn't very controversial. I was hoping for a little bit more spicy takes like the boys here give week to week. But
Damn.
yeah, it was a really good feature and demonstrative of the growth of Formula One in North America. So that was cool to watch.
There you go. Now, if it was on ESPN 8, the Ocho, things might have got a bit more racy. No pun intended. I guess Patrick Dempsey was I don't know if you're watching at that point, but he was a guest on there for a hot sec. Most of you may know him as McDreamy on Grey's Anatomy, but I guess he's a big gearhead. He has a team in Le Mans.
Yep.
And that's cool to see. Apparently,
he's been competing for a couple years in that, I believe.
Wow. You know who else was racing in Le Mans? Michael Fassbender,
Oh, really?
the actor.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah, I guess he's been doing it for a few years now. He crashed out, but I mean, good for him.
Yeah, like the World Endurance Championship that is featured in the Le Mans event typically has a few celebrity drivers. And yeah, great to see a couple of them stepping up.
There you go. We're kind of getting a bit off track here. That's what the maple syrup will do to you folks. But we forgot, actually, we were supposed to give a shout out to Team Ferrari last week for winning the 24 Hours of Le Mans.
Yeah. Giovinazzi.
Hey, Italian Jesus is now the greatest current Ferrari driver in the world.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool. I had no idea how that race worked until I was kind of paying attention to it last week. There's 3 or 4 categories.
Yep.
There's overall, which is always won by the hypercars.
Correct. Yep.
Then you have the GT3s, and there's another.
Yeah, there's like supercar class, GT3, GT2, and then I can't remember what the third is. But
there's like the hypercar, which I assume is supercar.
Yeah.
Same idea. Okay, so the 4th is actually it's sort of like an open category, and that's why I don't know if you saw the Camaro, the NASCAR does 24-hour Le Mans. That's why that NASCAR was in it, because it's just an open category for if you got like new technology you're trying out, whatever it may be.
Right. Yeah.
And they don't, muddle up the other categories.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that Camaro mark and I was wondering what the hell is going on. So thank you for that insight. I was thinking that car was going to get worked in Le Mans.
Yeah, and I think it did okay in that category. I can't confirm or deny, but it was pretty cool to see. And boy, that engine was roaring way more than the rest of the European engines.
Yeah, screaming.
All right, back to the race, and we're on lap 12, and we have our first pit stops of the race. We've got Hulk De Vries and Stroll coming in, and they came in just a second or two early because George put his rear end into the wall. And it looked real bad. The wheel was broken, the rim, everything. It was coming off. He on the radio was like, sorry, guys. I'm done. I'm out. Very, very compromised vehicle. He was able to get it back to the pits, and they actually worked on it for about a minute or two, and he went back out there. But as I'm sure you all saw, his race did come up short later on. He was not able to finish, but that meant a safety car while that was happening because there was a lot of debris, and that meant the free pit stop was available. And you know who didn't take it? Ferrari. And initially it was like, here we go.
Here it is.
Fuck up number 4. And that's not actually how it turned out.
Yeah, obvious first impression is going to be like, wow, this is a huge mistake. But with temperatures being lower, degradation wasn't as high, and they were able to eke out a little bit more of those mediums and hards eventually as well. So, and hats off. But just from first perspective, you think, wow, here we go again.
So also on lap 12, I don't know if you guys caught on the radio, but Max was saying he thought he hit a bird. Turns out, as of today, Red Bull did show a bird quite mangled. There was a graphic photo warning on the tweet. But it spent the rest of the race in the brake duct, made it over the line with Max at the end. So a shout out to the Canadian wildlife that has featured prominently at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve over the years with the champion bird this year.
Yes.
R.I.P., buddy.
Fully on display. Imagine at the end of the race, the bird just flies out or walks out like a G. No feathers left.
Yeah.
This bird wasn't flying anywhere.
No, it had moved on up to F1 heaven. So during those those free stops during the safety car, Lewis pulled out right in front of Fernando. It looked like it was enough to justify a penalty, in my honest opinion. Ended up being ruled no penalty, and before they even ruled whether or not it was going to be a penalty against Lewis, Lando did the same thing, pulling out on Albon. And I think at that point I was like, you know what? I don't think they're going to give penalties to either of them. They're just going to say, almost unsafe, whatever. Fernando did kind of sell it. And I don't know if you saw that replay. Toto was like, whoa.
Yeah. He was chirping him hard.
Which was pretty funny to see. We don't see Toto as often anymore because they're not dominating like they used to. But still a funny clip there.
Yeah, and some classic El Matador with the hand coming off the wheel. Looked like he was going to lose it for a second, but no, he kept it cool.
So I guess Lando actually did incur a penalty, not for the unsafe release, but it was for unsportsmanlike conduct leading up to that pit stop. McLaren was looking to double stack him and Piastri, and Lando apparently wasn't driving to the correct delta, i.e. slowing down the cars behind him to give the mechanics time to service both vehicles in the pit stop, and ultimately incurred a time penalty for unsportsmanlike conduct.
Interesting, because when you hear unsportsmanlike conduct, you think of like hockey. It's like, geez, what did he say? Did he say something to like the steward or something when he was driving by? But no, it was going too slowly.
Yeah. There was a bit of banter on the broadcast about the terminology used to describe the penalty, but essentially that was the cause of it.
So I noticed Hülkenberg slid all the way down to 15th by lap 21. Now, he was one of the first to pit before the safety car and obviously lost out there. But Stroll was able to kind of make his way up back into the top 10, and we'll get to that finish later. But does anyone know what happened to Nico?
No idea.
I mean, the Haas doesn't have the best race pace anyway, so he was always going to be fighting to stay in position. Folks, if you're listening and you know exactly what happened to Nico, let us know, because it didn't really get shown, and all of a sudden, he's way down at the bottom of the pack. Unfortunate for him after what was supposed to be a front row start. Of course, it ended up being a third row start, and then an out of the points finish for him. Race kind of settled down at that point, and as things moved forward, it became pretty apparent that somehow, some way, Ferrari made the right strategy call not coming in. I don't know. I mean, I was saying to Mike earlier, it's that classic saying, a broken clock is right twice a day. But that was impressive because it really seemed like going in and pitting on that safety car was the right call. Now, Checo didn't either, which was kind of interesting. But both, I mean, I can get that because, one's on one strategy, one's on the other. But both Ferraris not pitting seemed terminal, and it wasn't because tire degradation wasn't as bad. There was talks before the race. Is this going to be a one-stopper? Is it going to be a two-stopper? Is it going to maybe be both, depending on the team? And that's how it kind of played out. And those mediums for the Ferraris, they stayed on point. They didn't have to pit till lap 40, I believe it was. And at that point, they were comfortably in 4th and 5th. And they started, I believe, 10th and 11th on the grid.
Correct.
Yeah. Carlos did have that 3-place grid penalty. I believe he finished P8 and then had to start in P11.
Correct. Yeah. For impeding there.
For impeding Gasly in Q1. So turned out to be a great call. And I mean, listen, we're hard on Ferrari and they did have some fuck ups early in the race, but they turned it all around and they were able to salvage some really good results.
Yeah. And not allowing Carlos to pressure Charles, I think, allowed them to hold position and they were going to maybe move forward together. Maybe that was a little handout for Charles after the issues in quality that we saw. But yeah, I mean, strong double points finish for Ferrari.
So as we all expected, Max was running away with it. Not as much as he did in Spain, but the battle for second and third was what everyone was interested in. We had Lewis and Fernando. And we had Fernando being asked to lift and coast for a large part of the race, pretty much the full middle of the race. He wasn't happy about that. He wasn't exactly sure why that was happening. And Lewis was gaining. I think there was one lap he gained 2 seconds on Fernando, going from 5 seconds to 3 seconds behind. And Mike, you are our resident technical director. You found out why? The professor.
The professor, yeah. So it appears it was a fuel flow sensor issue. Incorrect data was being sent to the pit wall, which they interpreted as, Alonso was going to potentially run out of fuel if he didn't start lifting and coasting. For those of you who aren't familiar with what lift and coast is, essentially leading up to the braking point, you're going to take your foot off the gas and let the aerodynamics slow the car down so you don't have to use as much brake force, i.e. as much fuel.
So your braking point is a bit later.
Yeah, exactly. It's saving fuel for being on the power and using the aerodynamics to slow it down, and then you can apply the brake a little bit later, so there's less force required. However, these use brake-by-wire system, so I don't think there's fuel involved in that system.
So power, though, right?
Exactly, yeah. It's saving fuel under power, essentially, and using the aerodynamics to slow the vehicle down. Speculation on the broadcast with this was a rear brake issue, and that's what Alonso was nursing, but it turns out it was a fuel sensor that was giving incorrect data, so it was simply an anomaly. Once the team figured this out, Alonso had full reins. And I mean, we saw Lewis close the gap to roughly 1.5, 1.2 seconds. Once Alonso got the word from the pit wall that everything was all good, he opened that gap up to 3 seconds. So that wasn't released until after the race. So kind of everybody's left in the dark. But my question is had this anomaly not happened, how much pressure would he have been able to apply to Max?
Yeah, well, if you saw on the radio the first initial contact with Fernando and the team, he was like, what's going on? Can I stop this? I want to win this race.
Right.
Not about I want to stay in second. I want to win this race. So that's coming from a guy who's on track and he knows what's going on out there. He can see maybe the pace of the Red Bulls, Max's pace, not as strong as it was in Spain or in weeks prior. Aston Martin's upgrades obviously doing wonders. And you saw Lewis gaining because of the lift and coast, but you didn't really see Max pulling away too much from Fernando. Now, of course, Max probably also energy conserving, not pushing, not really having to. Mind you, he had a little hiccup at one point where he almost took himself off on a curb, and he found that pretty hilarious. But he wasn't getting any more than 7-8 seconds ahead of Fernando the whole time. And yeah, you wonder, at the very least, if Fernando's able to push, he's going to put pressure on Max. Max is going to have to at least engage. Could we have seen, like we haven't seen all year, an actual battle for first place with Max?
Yeah, I completely agree. And also, like, how much would have Max actually been able to defend at that point? You know, a long stint on the hard tires. What was his degradation like? Was he actually like nursing his tires as well? So how much would he have been able to defend against a full-on flying Aston Martin with Alonso behind the wheel? So yeah, hopefully we get to see a little more of that coming up in the future races. Austria coming up. That's going to be super exciting. So yeah, maybe that gap is actually closing.
You never know. I mean, it's going to be real interesting with Austria. That's a fun track to watch. There's always a lot of action because it is a very short track. I was actually racing it earlier today on the sim. Lap times coming in around 1 minute and 8 seconds. I was closer to 1 minute and 10. I'm still figuring out the wheel, but don't worry, folks. We're going to be competing in no time. So I got a bone to pick with the broadcast again. Just like Spain, a lot of different tire strategies happening at the Canadian GP. And I want to know, more than when it comes up and pops up for 2 seconds, how many times drivers have stopped and how long have they been on this tire that they are on at that current moment. It doesn't come up that often, the graphic, and it should just be all the time. Like, it's very simple.
Agreed. I think I saw it once each in the broadcast in the entire race.
Barely.
I don't know about you, Greg. But.
And for us, when we want to take notes and tell you about what was going on in the race, we need to see that more often.
100%.
But I digress. So we're near the end of the race. Checo actually ended up pulling off fastest lap. He took it from Lewis late on. But as I'm sure you all know, Max took the victory. It is his 41st victory and Red Bull's 100th victory. So we do need to take a moment and, I mean, congratulations,
Red Bull. Yeah.
Max now tying Senna for, I believe, 5th or 6th all time on the race wins.
Sure. You'd know better than me.
Why
on
not?
That one.
Sure,
yeah.
we're going to go with that
guy. Yeah.
It's definitely 5 to 6. It's in that range for sure. And I know a lot of people are going to be upset about this, but Max is slowly creeping into that conversation of, will he be the greatest of all time by the end of things? Now, he's always talked about how he wants to do other races. He wants to do endurance. He's always doing sim racing. And he's also said that once you win the Drivers' Championship and the Constructors' Championship once, it's kind of boring after you do it a few more times.
Easy to say when you're, 6 to 25 seconds ahead of your nearest competitor and winning every event of the season so far.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, we'll see what happens. He's obviously an incredibly talented driver. He's got an amazing team around him. I mean, that's what you need at the end of the day to win multiple championships. You can't just be an incredible driver. You do need that team and that car, that support there. And you see it with you saw it with Schumacher. You saw it with Lewis.
Yeah, just great comparison between like Senna, Schumacher, and now Max. I don't necessarily think Lewis kind of fits into that category for one simple reason that Lewis likes to do a lot of different things outside of racing, whereas Schumacher, Senna, and now Max is 100% racers. Always. That's their focus. And then, after Formula One, we'll see what happens.
Do you think, okay, with that being said, Lewis is the most talented driver of all time?
No, I don't necessarily agree that he's the most talented driver of all time.
But you're saying that all the other ones, they were 24/7 racing. I live, I eat, I sleep it. But Lewis, he's got some other stuff.
He's into acting. He's into fashion. He's looking to start his other businesses and things like that.
But was he into all that when he was winning his 7 championships? This seems like
yes
maybe
and no,
more
he
of a new
was a
thing.
little bit. Yeah, no, I don't disagree with the narrative for sure. But I think, not that Lewis hasn't always been fully committed to Formula One. I just think there's other aspects outside of Formula One that he's interested in a lot that might take away or that other drivers of similar caliber aren't necessarily into, right?
Well,
yeah, I think I know what you're saying, Mike, too. But like Schumacher definitely had some interests outside of sport. You could see that in the documentary about his life, like in a anything that got the adrenaline pumping. Senna
Fair
was
enough,
obviously a very charitable guy into boats. He had some hobbies away from the track too, but I do think you're right about like the overall winner's mentality and just that, type A laser focus that only a handful of guys have. And on that point, I do think Max is one of those drivers, and certainly in this generation, probably at the front of the pack when it comes to that kind of mentality. But I also think, like, as we approach the end of this season, obviously that's a rocket ship of a car, the Red Bull. It's dominant. There's no question about it. But I think the more races that Max wins, we're going to start to see the narrative shift a little bit from, yeah, it's a quick car to we're witnessing history. This guy is one of the greats. I think all signs are pointing in that direction. And you don't have to look any further than Checo's recent stumbles and not getting out of Q3 for the last 3 races to really see the gulf in talent and ability.
Right.
Max has got it. Like, he is going to be. By the time he's all said and done, he's going to be one of the greats for sure.
There's no question about that. And just to touch on Lewis one more time, I remember when Rosberg beat him, he said he had to do absolutely everything in his power to compete and eventually beat him for that driver's championship. Down to the like extra gram of a meal that he ate the night before. Like, he was like talking about counting calories, like, absolutely. So,
and just to jump in there, the psychological warfare that Nico imposed on Lewis, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's where I think maybe like the argument that Lewis is the most talented of all time could be a real thing. Now, he also has never had a family to distract him.
Also true. Yeah.
Not that families are a distraction, but you know what I'm saying. Like Schumacher was raising a family. And I think, especially in a sport where there is so much danger and death is, around every corner potentially, when you bring kids into this world, I think that can kind of change the mentality.
For sure. I mean, look at Sebastian Vettel's, his change and shift in mindset over the last few years too. So that's a really good point. But on Lewis too, I think the talent is no question. The talent's there. Like, the guy does not make many mistakes over the course of the career. He's probably, the fewest fuck ups per driver of our generation, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. As far as like, driver error and whatnot, Lewis's driving record is very, very pristine when it comes to that.
Yeah.
And, like you said, like we all agree, undisputed talent right there. Top driver in the world rankings for sure, historically as well. Yeah, it's just, is that drive always there for Lewis, or, and just kind of touching on like the Nicos and the Valtteries and whatnot, they were closer to Lewis than Checo has been to Max in the past too, right? So
that's a great point.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out for the rest of the year, but just congratulations to Max, congratulations to Red Bull, the whole organization, and doesn't look like they're going to be letting up anytime soon, that's for sure.
Definitely not. And Greg, you talk about witnessing history long-term with Max being potentially and most likely one of the greatest drivers of all time, but we may be witnessing history in this particular season because Red Bull is now 9 for 9. And there is no other team constructor that has ever won every single race in a season. And I wasn't watching in 88 and I was not watching in 2016, but it seems like this car is more dominant than most that's come before it. And it seems quite plausible, other than, a mistake from Max, which doesn't seem plausible at all. I think mechanical issue could be there. But once again, witnessing history long term, but also witnessing history short term. So all you Max haters, appreciate it.
And I think I was texting you guys after the GP too. Like, Max is fully leaning into and embracing all this villain energy around him. Like, either he doesn't pay attention to it or he's thriving off of it because, he's just so dialed. It's going to take, I think I said this too, I think it's going to take generational talent to knock him off his current throne.
Yeah, combined with, a top-performing livery as well.
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
Sure.
Hey, who knows? Aston Martin, we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, the gap's been closed, but not close enough yet.
No, I'm pumped for Austria, though.
Yeah, same.
All right, it's time for Who Impressed You, Who Disappointed You, and Who Surprised You. Who would like to go first?
Go ahead, Gregor. Have at it.
I think the impressed, close call for me. Obviously, we just lauded Red Bull and Max. Obviously, some pretty big milestones for constructor and driver, but hard not to pick Alex Albon, driver of the day, getting into the points in the Williams, the upgraded, promising Williams, and Albon's just been steadily improving throughout the season. So he's my most impressive. Surprised, Ferrari.
Yeah.
No question, for the reverse fuck up, which was nice to see. So hopefully that can continue for them. Disappointed, Logan Sargent. Poor guy. I mean, we talked about it earlier. Rookie, tough go, but I mean, eventually, and by eventually, likely the summer window, that gets evaluated. But yeah, he was very disappointing.
Yeah.
Who impressed me? I think I mentioned it early in the chat. Oscar Piastri. I mean, he passed Lando early on, turn 1, turn 2 there, and maintained position, and then just, I think, got caught out in the pit stops and whatnot. But yeah, nice to see an actual bit of race pace from the McLarens.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I was obviously surprised by Alex's performance. You know, I think I want to give almost both of those to him, surprised and impressed, because I know I'm flopping around here, but I mean, he had 30 laps to go and he held off the Alpine as well. So very, very impressive.
Incredibly impressive.
Yeah, incredibly impressive. Who am I disappointed in? I hate to beat up on the rookies, but yeah, De Vries in the Alpha. I don't even know if I heard his name all broadcast. You know, feeder team for Red Bull, rookie. I understand there's going to be a learning curve there, but much like Checo's results, these aren't good enough. You know?
Yeah, I forget who he was battling, but he locked up. Actually, it might have been Hulk into the runoff area.
Right.
They both got back on track, but
Magnussen.
It was Magnussen. It was K-Mag. So, I mean, we're going to get to silly season eventually. It's going to be in August, as it always is, but we may see a mid-season driver change at AlphaTauri. Who knows? Maybe both teams owned by the energy drink. Who impressed me? Aston Martin impressed me with those upgrades. You don't always get it right, and they got it really right. They knocked it out of the park with this. Pretty obviously, Fernando in P2 comfortably. Like in Spain, it was like, oh, wow, Mercedes. I mean, I said it. I was like, I don't think Aston Martin has a chance. It looks like Mercedes is going to run away with the second place in the constructors. But no, Aston Martin is not messing around, and they just leapfrogged the Mercedes in performance in 1 week. So very impressive. Who surprised me? I mean, the Ferraris are the obvious answer. We thought that we were witnessing multiple fuck-ups that was just going to go right into the race, and then we saw some big brain moves there. But I think I'm going to have to go with the Alpines. Surprised in not necessarily a good way. You know, I was surprised by them in a good way last week, and it looked like they were starting to put things together. Now, obviously, with Pierre, pretty unlucky in Q1, but then in the race, there were opportunities to make moves, and neither of them made it. So I was a little bit surprised by that. Pierre not getting into the points, and Ocon staying behind Albon.
Yeah.
And who disappointed me? The Canadian GP ticket prices. I don't know if you saw this, folks, but they jumped like fourfold.
What were they charging for? Do you know what they're charging for, like all 3 days, or?
I'm not sure. I just know it went from like $400 to like $2,200 or something.
Are you
crazy.
serious?
Well, I mean, it was sold out. It was packed. Everyone loves F1 now, including us. So supply and demand, I suppose. But that means, boys, that unless we get a free ride next year, it's going to be a pretty penny to attend.
Worth it.
100% worth it. And we're going for free. Someone's taking us. It's going to happen.
We're going no matter what.
We're going no matter what. 100%. A little disappointed we weren't able to go this year, but there was no way that was going to happen. It was too soon. Hopefully we can get some media passes next year. There's some fellow Canadian F1 podcasts that were looking forward to meeting us. We couldn't make it. They did. It looked like they had a grand old time. But next year, it's going to happen, and we're super pumped, and we're going to be getting some fantastic content that weekend. for sure. Last thing before we get out of here, we actually we're so hard on him, and we often forget to give him his due when he deserves it. And Lance, who had a disappointing qualifying, was able to climb up the grid and at the last second pass Bottas at the line, finish P9 in the points. So, I mean, even though it looked like it was going to be a rough Sunday for Lance based on Saturday, he was able to take that thing and make it 2 weeks in a row with points. So it's still, you watch him get interviewed, and he's so nonchalant. He's very laid back, and that shouldn't be an indicator of he's not very competitive. I mean, if any of you NFL fans out there, I'm a 49ers fan myself. The best defensive player in the league, Nick Bosa, he is massive, and he takes down quarterbacks for a living. But if I ever heard him talk, he's like, "Oh, yeah, it's good to see you guys. Like, I just got here, and I'm excited to sit down." And you're like, "There's no way this guy is out there bull rushing 350-pound men," but he is. So I can't be too much of a judge, but it just seems like he's just kind of there to have a good time.
You know, when your dad owns the manufacturer, the constructor, the team, and, you know, you don't have any worries about losing your seat based on performance, I'd be pretty relaxed too.
Yeah, that's fair.
I thought, though, like all things considered, I agree with you guys completely, but I thought he was a pretty good ambassador for the sport and for the city of Montreal through the weekend. Yeah, and good for him to, like, you know, give the crowd something to cheer about right on the home stretch to overtake there.
It's true. There was a big roar, and once again, I feel bad. I mean, he's a fellow Canadian. I don't want to step on him too much, but it'd be great to see a Canadian champion again. And when we have such a great car in the Aston Martin, evidenced by Fernando, obviously, you know, 2-time world champion. That's tough comparison, but it's there, and I would just love to see him get some better results. He's still young. He's still only 24. I mean, we have such high expectations from these younger drivers because of Max, and you know, you look at Mbappe in soccer. You know, he's the best player in the world at like 21 years old, but lots of room for improvement, and I'm sure he's got a long career ahead of him as long as Lawrence owns that team. And as Canadians, we love him too.
Worst case, Ontario put Villeneuve back in the Williams seat.
Could you imagine?
How old is Jacques? Hey, Surrey, how old is Jacques Villeneuve?
Got to be in his 50s by now, right? Late
40s. Dome going down the hair, buzzed off.
He's 52.
Yeah, 52.
Surrey's a little shy. Every time I ask her when we're recording, she never actually talks. She just pulls it up on my phone.
Because she's listening.
Because she's always listening. So Jacques 52. So that would probably be a disaster. He'd be out on turn 1, but it doesn't matter. We're here for the fireworks. All right, folks. There's not really much going on outside the track right now, so we don't have a sprint to the finish line. And we ran quite long today with the race review, that being the Canadian GP. So that's going to be it for us. We are 2 weeks away, well, under 2 weeks, but just under 2 weeks away from the Austrian Grand Prix at the Red Bull Ring. It is Red Bull's home race. They are most likely going to run away with it, but you never know, because Aston Martin potentially is hot on their tail.
And according to Mika Hakkinen, maybe McLaren are too.
Hey,
look out.
Look out
papaya.
For the racing papaya. Oh, and last but not least, speaking of the racing papaya, the Williams papaya golf livery, they had a competition.
Yeah. Right.
They're still having it, and there were 4 liveries to choose from. I wanted bolder than bold. Greg wanted heritage. They have both won their semifinal matches and are now facing off. And they are going to be, I believe it's Suzuka, Singapore, and maybe Abu Dhabi. 3 races that we're going to see that livery. So go on the Williams website, vote for your favorite one. Vote for bolder than bold if you want, or the heritage if you need to. But until then, folks, it's lights out.
See you on the grid.